Millionaire was certain his marriage was over and was already involved with another woman. But the day before signing the divorce, he had a night of passion with his wife. Days later, he was stunned by a secret he uncovered. The air in the Manhattan penthouse seemed to hum with unspoken words. Across the polished walnut dining table, set meticulously for two, James barely touched his lobster risotto, his favorite dish. His eyes were glued to his phone, the cold glow of the screen forming an invisible wall between them. Each subtle vibration of the device on the table felt like a tiny stab to Emily's heart. It was her, Jessica, the yoga instructor, with a sculpted figure and an effortless smile, who had stolen not just James's time, but the soul of their marriage. Emily tasted the metallic tang of bile in her throat. Humiliation. That was the word. Here she was in a final desperate effort to save a ship that had already sunk. The idea, no, the plea, had come from her best friend, Sarah. Fight for your marriage. Don't just hand over 10 years. Make him remember who you are. The woman he fell in love with. Sarah's words echoed in her mind as she watched James so close yet a universe away. "The meeting with the lawyers is tomorrow at 10, right?" she asked, her voice carefully measured to sound casual as she poured herself another glass of wine. The alcohol dulled the sharp edges of her pain and gave her the courage she lacked. "Yeah, Emily." 10, he replied, eyes still on the screen. "Don't worry, I won't be late. I'm the one most eager to get this over with." His cold, businesslike tone almost broke her resolve. The one most eager. As if the end of their life together was just another task to check off his list. But Sarah's advice rang in her ears. She would fight until the last second. With a sigh she masked as composure, Emily stood. The soft jazz of Norah Jones, carefully chosen, filled the room. A soundtrack to happier times when seduction was a game for two, not a one-sided act of desperation. She wore a black silk dress, simple but clinging to her curves with every movement, hinting at the body she knew he once craved. Beneath it, the finest lingerie she could find, a secret armor of confidence. "More whiskey," she offered, gliding toward him with the bottle of aged bourbon he loved. As she leaned to pour, she let the dress slip slightly, revealing the curve of her shoulder and the hint of her neckline. She caught his sharp intake of breath, a fleeting victory. He looked up from his phone, and for the first time that night he truly saw her, not the soon-to-be ex-wife, but the woman. His gaze traced the dress, her loose waves of hair, the familiar perfume she wore when they first met lingering in the air. "Thanks," he said, his voice a touch hoarse. He took the glass, his fingers brushing hers. A faint spark passed between them, undeniable. Emily returned to her seat, her heart pounding against her ribs. This game was dangerous. One misstep could plunge her deeper into humiliation, but the flicker of desire in his eyes spurred her on. She leaned back, crossing her legs slowly, the silk riding up her thigh. "You know, I was thinking about our first trip to Napa," she began, her voice low and warm. "That night we got lost in the vineyards and ended up dancing under the stars to some street musician's guitar. You told me I was the most beautiful woman you'd ever seen." James took a long sip of bourbon, his eyes fixed on her. The mask of the detached businessman was starting to crack. "That was a long time ago, Em." Her nickname slipped out, intimate and heavy with history. "Doesn't feel that long," she whispered. She rose again and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning her back to him, knowing he'd watch. Her silhouette against the glittering New York skyline was striking. She felt his gaze burning into her. Doubt gnawed at her. Was she begging for scraps from a man who'd discard her tomorrow? Shame flooded her, but she pushed it down. This was her last stand. She turned and found him standing a few feet away. The air crackled with restrained desire and years of memories. He took a step toward her. Instinctively, she stepped back, a coy smile playing on her lips. The hunter and prey had switched roles. His confusion was palpable. He wanted her, and it was driving him wild. "What are you doing, Emily?" he asked, his voice tight. "Just getting the drinks," she replied innocently, moving back to the bar. "I think we both need another round." This time, as she reached for his glass, he was faster. His hand caught her wrist, firm. The other slid to her waist, pulling her with a force that stole her breath. In one fluid motion, he sat her on his lap. The shock of their closeness, skin on skin, heat on heat, set the air ablaze. "Don't play with me," he growled, his face inches from hers, his breath warm with bourbon. Her heart raced. Fear, excitement, triumph, a volatile mix. She opened her mouth to speak, to say his name, to ask what this meant, but he was quicker. His lips crashed against hers, a kiss that was ravenous, not asking but taking. It was a kiss of longing, anger, and a desire they both thought long dead. His hands roamed her back, her hair, pulling her closer, as if to meld her into him. Her hands, initially resistant, surrendered, gripping his broad shoulders, matching his desperate intensity. She pulled back for a moment, gasping for air, for clarity. "James, she started, her voice shaky. He pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. "Don't talk," he whispered, his dark eyes raw with emotion she hadn't seen in years. "Just for tonight, don't talk." And there in the dining room, with their untouched dinner on the table and the jazz as their only witness, they made love. It wasn't tender. It was urgent, almost primal. A collision of bodies and souls, trying to say what words no longer could. When it was over, the silence was heavier than before. James gently lifted her off his lap. He stood, ran a hand through his hair in deep confusion, and walked toward the bedroom without looking back. The sound of the shower starting was like cold water on Emily's fevered skin. He said nothing. No words of comfort, regret, or hope. Minutes later, she heard him settle into bed. The bedroom's silence screamed. Emily stayed in the dining room, her body aching, her silk dress crumpled, her makeup streaked with tears that now fell freely. She had succeeded. She had rekindled his desire, had won last night. But the outcome was the same. He was gone, retreating into the bedroom's silence, leaving her with the wreckage of her final attempt. She glanced at the clock. Past midnight. In less than 10 hours, they'd be in a sterile conference room, with lawyers as witnesses, signing the end of everything. Her sobs were quiet, the stifled gasps of someone who knew there was nothing left to do. The battle was lost. Regret for what she'd done mingled with resignation. Now, she could only wait for the end. In the bedroom, James stared at the ceiling. His body throbbed, his mind a storm. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, Jessica's name lighting up the screen. He looked at it, a knot tightening in his stomach, and for the first time in months, he ignored it. He turned over, closed his eyes, and sank into a restless sleep. Emily's scent still on his skin, confusion seeded in his soul. He didn't know it, but that night, what he thought was a period was actually a comma. A comma that would change everything. Sleep didn't come for Emily, only a long, painful vigil. She watched the first light of dawn paint the sky grey through the penthouse windows, a grey that matched her soul. Each passing minute was a countdown to the official end. She didn't wait for him. She rose from the couch where she'd spent the night, took a quick shower, and dressed with the precision of a soldier preparing for battle. A beige linen blazer, elegant and impersonal, a shield for her inner cracks. By 7, she was out of the apartment, leaving behind the scent of bourbon and disillusionment. James woke to his alarm. Emily's side of the bed was untouched, cold. He sat up, his head heavy, the previous night hitting him like a wave. Her in that silk dress, the hungry kiss, their mutual surrender on the couch. Madness. A torturous indecision began to erode his resolve. What had he done? What did it mean? Before he could spiral further, his phone rang. Jessica. Her voice was a burst of sunshine, vibrant with promise. "Thinking of you, champ. Can't wait for our night. Got a surprise, you'll love." Her words soothed his bruised ego and confusion. They were easy, uncomplicated, the future he'd chosen. His hesitation dissolved, replaced by the cold logic that guided his business deals. What happened with Emily was a lapse, an improper farewell. Nothing more. When he arrived at the law firm, Emily was already there, seated in a leather armchair, her posture rigid, her face a mask of neutrality. Their eyes met briefly across the conference room. He saw the pain behind her facade and felt a pang of something, Guilt, perhaps, or pity. But it was too late. The lawyers entered, papers laid out on the table. The pen felt like a ton in his hand, but he signed. Then she signed, without a word, without a final glance. It was done. Head pounding, unable to face a day at the office, James did the only thing that made sense. He called Jessica. He needed to forget the night before, to drown in the beauty and ease she offered. She was stunning, as always, waiting for him in her sleek, minimalist Soho loft. Her superficial charm was the perfect antidote to the complicated depths he'd just left behind. Meanwhile, Emily sought refuge in her only safe haven, Sarah's Brooklyn apartment. As the door closed, her armor crumbled. She spilled everything to her friend, her voice thick with shame. "I humiliated myself, Sarah. I threw myself at him, and in the end, nothing changed." The tears came, raw and cathartic. Sarah held her, letting her pour out the pain. Hours later, exhausted, Emily returned to the now empty penthouse, a silent palace of memories. That night, her phone buzzed. A text from James. "Em, I'm sorry about last night. It wasn't fair to you. I hope you're okay." The message was a punch to the gut, a cowardly attempt to ease his conscience. She typed and deleted a dozen angry replies before shutting off her phone. The weeks that followed dragged in a fog of apathy. Emily tried to find a new rhythm, a new routine. But one morning the smell of coffee sent a wave of nausea through her. She dismissed it at first. Stress, her body reacting to the trauma of the divorce. But the nausea persisted, becoming an unwelcome morning companion. "Sarah, something's wrong," she said over the phone, her voice shaky. "I've been nauseous for days and my period's late." "Em, are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Sarah's voice was a mix of shock and excitement. "It's impossible," Emily shot back, clinging to logic. "I've had an IUD for years. It's never failed. IUDs aren't foolproof, Em. Nothing is." The possibility, once unthinkable, took root in her mind like a seed of panic and wonder. She bought a pharmacy test, her hands trembling so much she could barely open it. The result appeared in seconds. 2 lines. Positive. Emily's world stopped. Pregnant. At 40, divorced, from a night of desperation meant to be the end. Life, in its cruel and unpredictable irony, had played its ultimate trick. Meanwhile, James threw himself into his new life with Jessica. She was the perfect partner for a successful entrepreneur. Beautiful, young, charming, ambitious. They were the city's it couple at galas and openings, the picture of success. He convinced himself he was happy, that he'd made the right choice. Emily knew she had to tell him, not out of hope, but duty. He was the father. She called. It went to voicemail. "James, it's Emily. I need to talk to you. It's important." He didn't call back. She tried again the next day. He answered, rushed. "Em, I'm in a meeting. Can't talk now." She pressed. "It's urgent, James." He promised to call back. He never did. His coldness, his indifference turned her hurt into fury. He wouldn't give her 5 minutes after everything? Her patience snapped. Hands shaking with rage, heart pounding, she opened her messaging app, found his contact, and typed the words that would change everything. "James, since you don't have time to talk, I'll say it here. I'm pregnant." She hit send and stared at the screen, watching the delivered notification. The world went quiet, waiting for the explosion. The message glowed on James's phone, and for a moment the words didn't register. "I'm pregnant." He read it once, twice, 3 times. The hum of the boardroom, where his partner was pitching profit projections for a solar farm in rural Georgia, faded to a sharp buzz in his ears. Pregnant. Emily. Impossible. "Excuse me, gentlemen, 1 minute," he said, his voice tight and strange. He stood abruptly, ignoring curious glances, and strode to the hallway, his heart hammering. He dialed her number, impatience making his fingers shake. "Emily?" he said the moment she answered, skipping pleasantries. "What kind of game is this? Pregnant? How? What about the IUD? We spent 10 years not thinking about kids, and now, of all times, this happens." The questions tumbled out, a mix of panic and disbelief. On the other end, Emily's voice was cold, controlled, a stark contrast to his chaos. "It's not a game, James. The fault, if there is one, is ours. The IUD failed. Or maybe fate has a sick sense of humor. I don't know, I'm telling you because you're the father. Don't worry, I won't disrupt your perfect new life." The sarcasm in her final words cut deep. "But," he started, at a loss. "There's no but," she cut him off. "I'm going through with the pregnancy and with my life. I just thought you deserved to know." And she hung up. James stood frozen in the hallway, phone in hand, the ground slipping beneath him. He returned to the meeting but heard nothing. His mind was a whirlwind, a child, a baby, with Emily, the woman he'd just divorced to chase a whirlwind romance with another. The absurdity felt like a movie script. That night, Jessica noticed the change. He was distant, silent, staring into space. "Something wrong at work, babe?" she asked, trailing her manicured nails along his arm. "No, just the Georgia project. A lot of pressure," he lied, unable to share a secret he couldn't even process himself. The next morning, he called Emily. "You only did a drugstore test?" he asked, his voice tinged with a hope he didn't acknowledge. "Those can be wrong. You need a doctor, an ultrasound to be sure." "It's scheduled," she replied curtly. "This afternoon." An impulse he couldn't control took over. "I'm coming with you. I want to hear what the doctor says." At the clinic, the air was thick. They sat side by side in the waiting room, two strangers bound by a surreal circumstance. When called, James didn't waste time. Before the doctor could start, he was questioning, "Doc, how is this possible? She's had an IUD for years. What's the failure rate? Could it be a mistake?" Emily shrank in her chair, feeling like a specimen under his scrutiny. His interrogations stung deeply. "Sir, failures happen, though they're rare." "Let's check," the doctor said with professional patience, turning to Emily. "Let's begin." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the ultrasound wand gliding over Emily's stomach. James stared at the grainy black and white screen, seeing nothing. He felt like an intruder, a bystander to something no longer his. Then it happened. The doctor turned up the volume, and a rapid rhythmic sound filled the room. Thump, 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 thump. Fast, strong, unmistakable. The sound of a heart, a tiny heart, beating inside Emily. In that moment, something in James shattered. The sound pierced his armor of skepticism and logic, hitting a place he thought he'd locked away. The same overwhelming doubt from the night before the divorce returned with brutal force. The reality of that tiny life, part him, part her, struck him hard. His trance broke with the buzz of his phone. He grabbed it instinctively, a text from Jessica. A provocative selfie taken in her bedroom mirror captioned, "Your afternoon of love is waiting. Come over." The contrast was jarring. On one side, the pure, miraculous sound of new life. On the other, the raw, seductive pull of passion. The sacred and the profane collided within him. His mind short-circuited. He felt dizzy. The appointment ended. The doctor confirmed the pregnancy, dating it to that final night. No doubt remained. James left the clinic like a robot. He didn't look at Emily, didn't speak. He walked to his car, his head spinning. He should go to the office, work, think. But he couldn't. He needed escape from this crushing reality. He started the car and instead of heading right toward the office, turned left. He drove fast, the baby's heartbeat echoing in his ears, Jessica's image burning in his mind. He headed straight to her loft, desperate to use her body to silence his soul. Jessica's loft was a shrine to modernity, all white and grey with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the perfect stage for the passion she offered, intense, visually stunning, but free of emotional mess. James gave himself to the promise of her photo, seeking in her heat an antidote to the cold in his soul. He made love to her, but his mind was miles away, trapped in an ultrasound room with the rhythm of a heart that wasn't his. After, lying on her pristine sheets, he stared at the ceiling while Jessica chattered about a yoga retreat. He nodded absently, his mind adrift. "James, are you listening?" she asked, snapping her fingers in front of his face. "You're on another planet today. What's up?" Before he could muster an excuse, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from his business partner, Mark. Meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. We need to finalize your trip to Georgia. The locals' resistance is growing. You need to go down there, be the face of the project, convince them to sell. It's the critical phase. The solar farm. The ambitious, controversial project consuming his professional life. He knew it would be a monumental challenge. It was pitched to the public and investors as a green energy milestone, a step toward the future. But behind closed doors, the reality was murkier. To build the massive farm, hundreds of rural families living on that land for generations would need to be displaced. The pressure to sell their properties for pennies was immense. Jessica, seeing his serious expression as he read the text, assumed she'd found the source of his distraction. It's the Georgia project, isn't it? That's why you're so stressed. He seized the excuse like a lifeline. Yeah, it's complicated. I'll have to go down there for a while, sort things out. Her face lit up. Awesome, I'll come with you. A stint in rural Georgia sounds fun. We can explore, and I'll help you unwind after those stressful days. The idea unsettled him, but he lacked the energy to argue. Jessica's presence would be a distraction, a shield against the solitude and thoughts haunting him. The next day, duty brought him to the door of the penthouse that was once his. Emily answered. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and the memory of the ultrasound. I came to tell you I'll be away for a while, he said, avoiding her eyes. In Georgia, for work. But if you need anything at all, just call. She nodded, arms crossed over her chest, shielding herself and the life she carried. His confusion was tangible. He wasn't the cold executive or the passionate lover. He was a man divided, lost between worlds. The silence stretched, awkward. Then, driven by an impulse that overrode reason, he stepped forward. Can I? He asked, his voice low, eyes fixed on her still flat stomach, which now held the universe to him. Can I feel? Emily hesitated, her body tense. But the raw vulnerability in his request softened her. She uncrossed her arms and nodded slowly. With a gentleness that surprised her, he placed his hand on her stomach. His hand was large, warm. He closed his eyes, as if trying to connect with that mystery through touch. Emily, caught in the moment, closed hers too. For an instant there was no Jessica, no divorce, no pain, just the three of them in the quiet of the penthouse. A lone tear slid down Emily's cheek. She wiped it quickly, but he felt her slight tremble. James opened his eyes and pulled his hand back, suddenly self-conscious, as if he'd trespassed on sacred ground. Reality crashed back. I have to go, he said, his voice thick. He turned and left, leaving Emily at the door, her hand where his had been, feeling a warmth that wasn't physical. He was off to Georgia to build his empire, leaving behind the start of a legacy he was only beginning to grasp. Weeks turned into months. Emily's stomach, once a hidden secret, began to curve, a gentle, undeniable sign of new life. With it, an unexpected purpose bloomed. The apathy that had consumed her post-divorce gave way to a restless energy. She wouldn't be just the pregnant ex-wife of a tycoon. She needed to be Emily again. Sarah showed her the way. I saw this and thought of you, she said, pulling up the website of a small non-profit called Deep Roots. The group exposed the socio-environmental impacts of large projects in rural Georgia, specifically fighting the pressure from James's solar energy giant. His company's name leaped off the screen, but instead of pain, Emily felt a spark of indignation. The non-profit needed a consultant with design and decor experience for an innovative project, helping families resisting land sales to revitalize their homes sustainably, using local materials and techniques to celebrate their culture. It was her old profession, reborn with purpose. Without hesitation she applied. Her expertise and passion landed her the job. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in the dusty, sun-scorched town of Willow Creek, Georgia, James sank into a mire of frustration. The stint in Georgia dragged on, and the locals' resistance was fiercer than his New York reports had predicted. They weren't just country folk, as Jessica dismissively called them. They were people with stories, roots deep in that dry, meaningful land. Jessica, who'd come along, was bored. The sun she'd craved was too harsh, The bugs irritated her, and the lack of luxury grated. "James, why don't you just offer them more money and be done with it?" she said, flipping through a fashion magazine on the porch of their upscale rental. But he was starting to see things differently. Visiting the communities, he saw dignity in the eyes of an old farmer, offering him water, despite knowing James was there to take his land. He saw beauty in the simple, brightly painted homes, and heard stories passed down through generations, things money couldn't buy, things his project in the name of progress would destroy. Word reached him that Deep Roots had hired a new consultant to bolster the community, a minor annoyance, another hurdle. He and Mark decided a direct confrontation was needed, a public hearing in Willow Creek, where they'd pitch the project's undeniable benefits, hoping to sway public opinion and isolate the resistors. Emily traveled to Georgia with a mix of fear and excitement. It was her first solo trip in years. Each jolt of the small plane to the rural south felt like her baby urging her on. She didn't know she was flying into the heart of James's battle. Her work was with the families, revitalizing their homes. The public hearing would be her first official appearance, where the non-profit would present its cultural resistance project. The hearing day arrived, hot and tense. The town gym was packed. On one side, James's suited executives with polished slide decks. On the other, locals in simple clothes, their faces etched with sun and worry. Jessica sat in the front row beside James, looking like an exotic flower in a rustic garden. When it was the non-profit's turn, a middle-aged woman took the stage. "I'd like to introduce our new consultant, the woman helping us prove our roots are worth more than any solar panel. Please welcome Emily Carter." James froze. Her name echoed through the gym, but to him it was an explosion. He watched her climb the steps, her pregnant belly now unmistakable under a light dress. His breath caught. Jessica beside him turned, eyes wide with shock and realization. "That's her! Your ex, divorced and already pregnant," she hissed, venom in her voice, unaware the child was James's. But James barely heard her. His eyes were locked on Emily. The woman he'd left behind, who he thought was safely tucked away in New York, was here in the middle of his war, an unexpected leader of the opposition. Emily stood at the microphone, heart pounding. Her gaze met James's across the crowd. For a moment, the world vanished. She saw his shock, his confusion, Jessica at his side. The pain hit, but she channeled it. She wasn't here for him. She was here for these families, and for the child she carried. With a steady voice, she spoke, not of numbers or contracts, but of dignity, of what it means to live in a home built by your people, of the smell of rain on the earth, of the right to belong. Her speech was passionate, real. James watched, paralyzed. The woman he'd tried to forget was stronger, more radiant, more powerful than ever. And she was pregnant with his child, fighting against the biggest project of his life. The conflict between cold business logic and the overwhelming emotion surging within him began to tear him apart, right there in public, under hundreds of eyes. He was at war, but suddenly he wasn't sure which side he was on. Emily's speech landed like a sudden rain in the Georgia heat. The silence that followed was louder than any applause. The locals looked at her with newfound hope. She'd given voice to their soul. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Their strategy of charts and cash promises had been undone by the most powerful weapon, raw emotion. James stood rooted, Jessica's voice a distant, grating buzz. "You're going to let her do this? James? Say something. Shut her down, or we'll be stuck in this mosquito-ridden hellhole longer." But he couldn't. He looked at Emily, now stepping off the stage, swarmed by locals hugging her, and saw not an adversary but the woman who knew the story behind every object in their home, who cried when their dog died, who now carried his child. She glowed. Her pregnancy and new purpose had given her a strength he hadn't seen in years, a strength his indifference had helped dim, now blooming in opposition to him. The hearing ended in chaos. Emboldened by Emily's words, locals chanted, "Our roots aren't for sale." Mark yanked James's arm. "We need to get out of here. This was a disaster." In the exit frenzy, Jessica confronted him, face flushed with fury. "So this was it? Your little secret? Your pregnant ex-wife playing savior to these nobodies?" You made a fool of me, James. Jessica, not now, he said, his mind still reeling. Now, she shouted, drawing eyes. I'm done with this backwater and your secrets. We're through, James. I'm on the first flight back to New York. She stormed off, expecting him to call her back. Her departure barely registered, and it infuriated her more. His mind was elsewhere. He needed to talk to Emily. He spotted her outside, talking with farmers. He approached, but a weathered man in a baseball cap blocked him, eyes hard. What do you want with her? Haven't you caused enough trouble? Emily heard the commotion and turned. Her eyes met James's over the shoulders of the locals shielding her. A human and emotional wall stood between them. Let him through, she said, calm but firm. They parted reluctantly, and the two faced each other, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. What are you doing here, Emily? He asked, voice hoarse. What do you think? I'm working. I found something I believe in. Something bigger than decorating penthouses for people who already have everything. The jab hit home. The question is, what are you doing here, James? Trying to take the little these people have? You don't get it. It's progress, clean energy, jobs. He started, reciting the corporate line, but the words rang hollow even to him. Progress for who? She shot back, eyes blazing. For your investors in Manhattan and these families, what happens to them? They become stats in your reports. Her truth disarmed him. He fell silent. Then his gaze dropped to her belly. Our child, he whispered. You're putting yourself at risk in the middle of this mess. A bitter smile touched her lips. For the first time, James, I don't feel at risk. I feel alive. I want our child to be born in a world where people fight for what they believe in. A different legacy than a solar farm built on others' history, don't you think? Her words cut deep. The powerful entrepreneur was reduced to a man without answers, faced with a truth he'd tried to ignore. He wanted to reach out to touch her, but he had no right. That night, at a tense dinner with Mark and local investors, the pressure on James intensified. You need to control your ex-wife, Mark hissed. She's become the face of the resistance. The local media's calling her the mother of the land. It's a PR nightmare. Mid-conversation, an investor, loosened by wine, let slip something that chilled James's blood. Good thing the environmental impact report we commissioned downplayed the soil contamination issue. If the real data on panel waste and groundwater effects got out, this project would be dead. Soil contamination? Waste? James felt sick. He confronted Mark alone. What's this about hidden data? You knew? Mark shrugged. James, every big project has shortcuts. It's the cost of progress. You didn't think it'd be all clean and perfect, did you? The realization hit hard. He wasn't just the project's face. He was the useful fool, believing the green facade while the real dirt was swept under the rug. He'd been manipulated as much as the families he was displacing. Rage consumed him. Rage at Mark, the investors, but mostly at himself. He left the restaurant without a word. He drove aimlessly down dirt roads, dust rising under the moonlight. He stopped at the small house where he knew Emily was staying, one she was helping revitalize. The lights were on. He needed to talk to her, not as the company president, not as her ex-husband, but as a man who just realized he was fighting the wrong war, on the wrong side, and the only person who saw the truth was the woman he'd hurt so deeply. He stepped out of the car, heart in his throat, and walked to the door. He had no plan, just a certainty. He needed her help. Emily opened the door and found him standing there, bathed in the porch's yellow light, road dust on his expensive shoes. The ruthless executive was gone, replaced by a man carrying the weight of the world. Before she could speak, he did, his voice low and heavy with unexpected emotion. Can I hug you? The request was so raw, so disarming, it broke her defenses. She didn't answer with words, just stepped aside to let him in. In the quiet of the small living room, he wrapped her in his arms. It wasn't a hug of passion or desire, but of sheer need, a lost man seeking an anchor. He held her tightly, face buried in her hair, her scent and solidity a balm for his tormented soul. When they parted, his eyes fell to her belly. He's in there, he whispered, more to himself. He rested his hand gently on her rounded stomach. I messed everything up, Em, everything. The words poured out. He told her about the investor's slip, the soil contamination, the faked reports, Mark's manipulation. He admitted feeling like a fool, a pawn in a dirty game he'd helped build. Emily listened, her initial shock turning to grim understanding. The greed behind the project was worse than she'd imagined, and James, the man she'd seen as the game's master, was also its victim. I need to see it. With my own eyes, he said, his gaze resolute. Take me to one of the worst affected areas. I need to understand what I was about to destroy. The next day, they drove together, leaving a trail of dust and uncertainty. The journey started tense, heavy with years of hurt and months of conflict, but as they ventured deeper into rural Georgia, walls began to crumble. He asked about her pregnancy, her cravings, her fears. She listened as he spoke of his frustrations, the investor's pressure, the loneliness at the top. They stopped at a small farming community, a cluster of clapboard houses nestled by a creek that, according to the falsified reports, would be impacted. An old man named Tom welcomed them with the simple hospitality of someone with little but a big heart. He showed them his fields, where his family had farmed for 5 generations. He spoke of the water not as a resource, but as a living entity, a mother nourishing the land. Emily saw a James she didn't know. Not the arrogant executive, but a man listening intently, asking questions with humility, looking at the ground with genuine shame. He was seeing, perhaps for the first time, the human face behind his business plans. As they sat on Tom's porch, sipping strong, sweet coffee, Emily felt a sudden, strong movement inside her, a twitch, a tumble. She caught her breath, eyes wide. "What's wrong?" James asked, alarmed. He moved, she whispered, a wondrous smile spreading. The first real one. Without thinking, she took his hand and placed it on her belly. "Be still," she said. They waited in silence. Then it came again, a small, distinct kick against his palm. In that moment, under the Georgia sun, the outside world vanished. James looked at Emily, his eyes shining with raw emotion, and she saw not the ex-husband who'd hurt her, but the father of her child, sharing a miracle. The fear of being hurt lingered, but a tiny seed of hope sprouted beside it. The following weeks were a whirlwind. James used his anger and insider knowledge to fight from within. He confronted the company board, presented evidence of the fraud, and with help from lawyers Emily knew through the non-profit, proposed a new plan. A smaller, restructured project that respected the community's lands and created a permanent preservation fund, managed by the locals themselves. The day to present the new plan arrived. The same gym, the same community, but the atmosphere was different. A celebration, a reconciliation. James stood on the stage, not as a conqueror, but as a partner. He spoke of responsibility, reparation, a future where progress and tradition could coexist. Emily watched from the front row, her heart swelling with unexpected pride. She stood to clap, and in that moment felt a sharp pang and a rush of warmth down her legs. She looked down, shocked. Her water had broken. The baby was coming weeks early. Panic flashed across James's face when he saw her. He leaped from the stage and ran to her. "What's wrong? What happened?" "My water broke," she managed, her breath short. Chaos erupted. Amid the commotion, James scooped her into his arms and carried her to the car, pushing through the crowd. He drove at breakneck speed to the local hospital, heart pounding harder than the engine. He held her hand the whole way, whispering encouragement, his fear of losing her, losing the baby, overwhelming everything. The next hours were a blur of pain, fear, and waiting. Finally, a strong, healthy cry echoed down the hall. When the nurse called him, he entered the modest room and saw Emily, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle. "It's a boy," she said, voice weak but joyful. "Liam." The nurse placed Liam in James's arms. He was so small, so fragile. Looking at that wrinkled face, those perfect tiny hands, James's world shifted. All the corporate battles, the millions, the projects, nothing mattered. He cried. Not quietly, but with loud, wrenching sobs, a man breaking and rebuilding at once. In that simple hospital room, far from the luxury and power, he understood. His greatest legacy wasn't a solar farm. It was this tiny life in his arms. It was the incredible woman who brought him into the world. It was the family he nearly destroyed and by a miracle had a chance to rebuild. The late afternoon light in Georgia painted the sky in strokes of orange and pink. A daily spectacle James and Emily now watched from the porch of the modest house they'd rented. It wasn't a Manhattan penthouse, but to them, it was paradise. Months had passed since Liam's birth, months that felt like a lifetime filled with a peace they thought they'd lost forever. They didn't return to their old lives. Instead, life came to them. James, still with the company, managed everything remotely. Insisting on overseeing the new solar project's implementation in person, he wanted to ensure, with his own eyes, that every promise to the community was kept, no shortcuts taken. His presence was no longer that of a boss, but a neighbor, a partner. Their relationship wasn't rekindled with a grand romantic gesture, but rebuilt day by day in small acts of trust and care. In the nights he got up to soothe Liam's cries, in the quiet breakfasts where their eyes met over their son's head, in the mutual respect guiding every conversation. The love that re-emerged wasn't the feverish passion of the past, but something deeper, stronger, forged in crisis and tempered by forgiveness. The experience sparked a new shared dream. Together, they founded the Deep Roots Foundation, funneling part of the project's profits and their own resources to support other small communities. The foundation didn't just fund sustainable projects, it listened to local needs, respecting the land's culture and ancestral knowledge. Emily, with her sensitivity and expertise, led the initiative, while James used his business acumen to ensure its sustainability and impact. Their joy was tangible. James discovered he was a hopelessly devoted father. He marveled at every smile, every babble from his little Georgian, as he proudly called Liam. He carried him in a sling while walking through the town, introducing him to locals who welcomed him warmly. He was no longer Mr. James, the outsider executive. He was Liam's dad, Emily's husband, one of them. Little Liam, with his curious eyes and easy smile, became the living symbol of that new beginning. He was proof that from the deepest pain can come the greatest joy, that a mistake can spark redemption. He was the bond uniting not just his parents, but two worlds once thought irreconcilable. In the heart of rural Georgia, where the sun kisses the earth and time moves at its own pace, a story that began with betrayal's bitterness, divorce's pain, and the brink of an end had transformed. It blossomed into a journey of repair, not just of a marriage, but of a community. And it proved that sometimes you must lose everything to find what truly matters. A love rebuilt on respect, a family united by purpose, and a legacy measured not in dollars, but in lives transformed. So, did you love this thrilling story of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings? If Emily and James's journey moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Give it a thumbs up to let me know you enjoyed it and want more stories like this. Share it with that friend who loves a great romance full of twists and turns. Most importantly, if you're not already part of our community, subscribe to the channel now and hit the bell so you don't miss any chapters of the upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you so much and see you next time.